Hi, I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Hi, my name is Chrissy Clements. Everyone watches AccessTV.org.
Good morning again. This is Jonathan Small, host and producer of All About You, a program that's broadcast every Monday morning at AccessTV.org studios in downtown Hartford. Again, this program is designed to give the guests a chance to give their life story pretty much from the beginning towards where it is right now. Today I kind of have a very special guest that will be on for my program. He ran for governor in the Republican side in 2010. He's a business owner. He's an ambassador to Ireland. He was appointed under the George Bush administration. He's planning a possibility of running for governor in 2014. No other than Thomas C. Foley. Good morning, Thomas. How you doing?
Fine.
All right.
Glad to be here with you.
Okay, that's good to hear. Could you kind of give people out there pretty much where your life got started at?
Well, I grew up in Chicago.
Okay.
I was born in 1952. That seems like a long time ago. I actually just turned 61. So
Okay, happy
my
birthday.
birthday was last week. And I lived there until I was about 15. And then I moved east and finished high school out here, and then went to college in Boston. Then I went back to Chicago and worked there for 2 years, and then I came back east to go to graduate school in business administration. And then I moved to New York City, and I lived there for 11 years, from 1979 until 1990. In the meantime, I got married and had a child, and so I moved to Connecticut, where I live now.
Okay. What was life like growing up in Chicago?
Well, I like the Midwest. It was a nice place to grow up, and I grew up in a very comfortable community. My father had a good job, so things were nice, and I'm one of 6 kids, and I was in the middle of a large family.
Okay.
So it was pretty chaotic, actually, growing up, but fun. And I remember running around a lot after school and having a lot of free time that maybe kids don't have as much of today. We didn't have organized sports, or at least as organized as they are today, and extracurricular activities. So we ran around a lot, and I spent a lot of time out in the woods and turning over rocks and streams. I loved reptiles, so snakes, turtles, they were all part of my early years. And then when I came east to go to high school, it was a very different experience, but equally as enjoyable.
Now, you are a business owner. Growing up in Chicago, was you business inclined? Did you have a business knowledge of what you wanted to do with your life in business?
You know, I'm a parent, so I'm understanding more and more every day about what kids decide to do. And my father was a businessman, and I think that so much of kids' learning is mimicking or imitating what their parents do. So it's very typical or normal for people to emulate their parents and want to do what their parents did. So I had a tremendous amount of respect for my father, and he was in business, so I sort of thought, I think from a very early age, that I'd probably go into business too, which I did.
What was the business climate like at that particular time when you was growing up as a teenager?
Well, it was pretty good. I think the economy, I was sort of a post-World War II economy. It was a lot of expansion, people coming back and from the war and getting jobs. The stock market was rising. My dad worked for a company. He was sort of a corporate manager, and the company was doing well, so I always remember things as being pretty good.
Which university did you attend towards?
I went to Harvard University.
To Harvard University, okay.
Twice, actually, for college and for business school.
Okay. Now, you at one point moved to New York. Did you get into business at that stage of your life?
When I left business school, I went to New York and worked for a consulting firm called McKinsey, and McKinsey does consulting for mostly large Corporation. So it's a global firm with offices all over the world,
Mhm.
and it's a consulting firm that is hired by companies to come in and solve challenging problems that they have. So I learned a lot of problem-solving skills. Was exposed to a lot of the challenges that businesses face working at McKinsey. And then I went to Citigroup Venture Capital, where I was investing Citigroup's money for them in private equity deals and venture capital deals.
Mhm.
I did that for 4 years, and I left there in 1985 and went out on my own and started my own private equity firm.
Okay. What age did you actually join the Republican Party?
Well, I first registered to vote when I was 18, and I registered as a Republican, so if that's...
Okay.
But I've always been involved in Republican politics.
Uh-huh.
As I mentioned, my mother's family was very involved in Republican politics in Wisconsin, where she was from.
Okay. What did you kind of enjoy the most growing up, politics or business?
Well, growing up, I wasn't doing business, but I always liked fixing things. I love fixing cars and building go-karts and motor scooters and things like that.
Okay.
Somebody once told me that anything that had a motor in it was something that I was going to enjoy being involved with, and that seems to have been true most of my life.
Well, I'm glad you actually said that, because many times people don't know that you might have other skills or other talents that you do other than business or politics. So I think it is good that you was able to mention what you just did, growing up as a child, being able to fix different things. Did you start a family early in life? Did you get married kind of early, or did you just...
Actually, I didn't, because I was very interested in my career and wanted to get as far as I could at an early age so I could enjoy some of the comforts of life, but also move on to things past business, politics, whatever it was.
Okay.
And also to be have as much time for parenting as I could. So I didn't get married until I was 37.
Oh, okay.
So that's pretty late, I think, by
Mhm.
today's standards, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, at what point did you come to Connecticut?
I came in 1990,
Okay.
and I came here. I actually had gone to school for a couple of years in the late 60s in Connecticut. I loved the state. I loved the topography, the people, the culture of the state.
Mhm.
So that was very appealing to me, but I also came here because of the excellent schools.
Okay.
And I had a young child at the time, and we wanted to make sure he had the best educational opportunities available to him.
Okay. So you've been a resident of Connecticut since 1990?
Correct.
Okay. Was you interested in politics here in Connecticut when you came here in 1990?
I had been involved in politics, and when I lived in New York City, I was on the finance committee of the Republican Party there. So as soon as I moved to Connecticut, I switched over and checked in with the party here to see how I could help. And so that way I got involved in initially fundraising, but also supporting candidates in other ways, helping with campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Did you move to Greenwich, Connecticut when you came to this state in 1990?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what's it like living in Greenwich? We hear that Greenwich is a very affluent town, a lot of multi-millionaires, close to New York City. What is the atmosphere like in Greenwich, Connecticut?
Well, let me partly explain why I moved to Greenwich. I had my own business, and I had an office and 20 or so employees in New York City.
Okay.
And I not only wanted to move to Connecticut, but I wanted to move my business to Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
So I needed, and a lot of those, my employees actually lived in New York City. So I wanted to be as close to New York City for their convenience as we could be.
Okay.
And and Greenwich, of course, is the first town coming into Connecticut from New York. So it was the most convenient place for most of my employees who were going to choose to stay in New York City. About half of them decided to move to Connecticut, but the ones who stayed in New York City, more convenient for them. So really it was a business decision that landed me in Greenwich. But Greenwich also has very fine schools, and that was another reason I decided to become a resident there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I asked that question because many times people in other parts of the state kind of view Fairfield County more of New York City. I know it's a suburb, actually, or it's part of the New York metropolitan area, but do you kind of feel like in that part of the state you're more of a New York atmosphere, or do you feel more of a Connecticut atmosphere?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because a lot of the media markets that people see in Fairfield County are actually New York media. It's you can't even get the Hartford Courant in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Okay.
And most people would be watching New York television. So most of what people see and hear and read about in Fairfield County is more New York focused, for example, than Hartford focused.
Okay.
But I really believe, and it's certainly the case with me, that people live in Fairfield County, and many people who live in Fairfield County have come from New York City. And the reason they're there is because they don't want to be in New York City.
All right.
And they like Connecticut. So I wouldn't label them as New Yorkers. I think they're actually people who've decided they don't want to be in New York. They want to be in Connecticut. They don't want to be in a multi-million person city. They want to enjoy the open spaces and all the things that Connecticut has to offer.
Okay. And obviously down in Greenwich, you do have a lot of open spaces, a lot of things that many people might not be aware of from other parts of the state.
Well, you know, most of Connecticut is open. We have tremendous open spaces and forests in Connecticut. Now, right here in Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport and some of the cities, there obviously is less space, but most of Connecticut is open, and most of Connecticut's towns, there are 168 towns in Connecticut, and most of them are what they would call sort of leafy country / suburban communities. And I think that's one of the charms of Connecticut, but also the fact that we have cities, and cities tend to have a higher concentration of supporting the arts and certain types of jobs and other things. So we have both.
Yeah, both. Okay. Now you came here in 1990 to Connecticut, and you had your business growing, and at that particular time, going into the 90s. Connecticut had kind of a reputation of losing a lot of businesses, losing a lot of companies. I believe we lost UPS that used to be headquartered down in Greenwich. How did your business be affected going into the 90s here in Connecticut?
Okay. You're right that a lot of businesses did leave, and a lot of businesses were arriving too in the 90s, and they were coming to Connecticut because of the favorable tax environment.
Okay.
So a lot of people moved their businesses from New York City or New York State into Connecticut, and that's why Greenwich and other towns in Fairfield County have a lot of what they call hedge funds and private equity funds.
Okay.
So Connecticut's favorable tax rate versus New York and New York City were bringing a lot of businesses into Fairfield County, while other businesses were leaving. So businesses that had a lot of manufacturing jobs, for example, that couldn't compete with lower labor rates in the South or in China, they were leaving. But a lot of other businesses were coming. My big concern now, if we get to talk about it on the show, is that people are still leaving, but because of what's happened with taxes in this state in the last 15 years, I'm afraid that a lot of the people who were coming aren't going to be coming anymore.
Well, how did your business and how did you feel about the state income tax being introduced into the state in 1991?
I think it was unfortunate, frankly, because I think, as I said, one of the things that attracted a lot of businesses to the state was that there was no income tax on earned income.
Okay.
So I think that changed the dynamic. But as long as the income tax rates were significantly below New York and New Jersey, there still was a reason for somebody thinking about locating here or leaving New York City to come to Connecticut instead of their alternatives. That's gone now because the most recent tax increase put in by Governor Malloy has brought Connecticut up to parity with New York State and New Jersey. Okay.
Well, obviously, we know you ran for governor in 2010, and we will get to that point.
Okay.
But going through the 90s was, again, a very, like you say, some businesses or many businesses was coming in from New York City into our state. When UPS left Greenwich, Connecticut, did that kind of have an impact that many people might not be aware of?
Well, I don't know how many employees UPS actually had in Greenwich. It was I believe, just their corporate office.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think it affected thousands and thousands of people. UPS employs many thousands of people across the country, but I think it was just our corporate headquarters that was in here in Connecticut that left. We also lost U.S. Tobacco. There have been a a number of companies that were headquartered in and around Greenwich that have left, and it's mostly related to taxes.
Mm-hmm. Well, how have your business been able to sustain a lot of the changes with the tax structure and how the cost of doing business exists in this state? How have you been able to be so competitive with your business here?
Well, the business that I brought here in 1990,
mm-hmm.
I don't have here anymore, because when I started going into public service, that business ended up being relocated to the companies that were owned by the business. So that was a business that raised money to invest in companies.
Okay.
And then it built up a portfolio of companies. And then when I went into public service, we stopped investing in new companies and just were running the companies we had. So all the staff that was there were no longer needed. Most of them went down and worked for the companies that I own, and they're still there. But we don't have the office in Greenwich anymore that we had.
Oh, okay. At one point, did you decide to get more active in the political field here in Connecticut?
Yeah. Well, I got a call from a guy down in Texas in 1994 who said he wanted to run for governor.
Okay.
And he said he'd heard that I was pretty good at raising money up here and would I help him out? And I said, sure. And that turned out to be George W. Bush.
Yes.
So I helped with that race, and then I helped him get reelected. And then he decided to run for president in 2000, and myself and another active Republican in Greenwich named Craig Stapleton kind of headed up his fundraising in this part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, I got very involved in presidential politics, which is like the Super Bowl.
Okay, it is definitely.
It's a big deal.
Uh-huh.
And if the person you've been supporting gets elected, that's a great thing, because you really get to see our political process at the top and how it works and how our country works largely. So that was really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked the president if he ever needed me to help out. He knew what my skills were. To please let me know. And I got a call a couple of years later, and he asked me to go over and serve in Iraq and run the economy over there and try and get the private sector back up and running.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for 7 months, and then I came back and resumed my business activities, and then he asked me if I'd go over and represent the United States in Ireland.
Okay.
I'm Irish American, so that made a lot of sense.
That made
to
a
me.
lot of sense. It did. To represent.
So I went over and did that for 2.5 years, and that was a fantastic experience.
Okay.
Both of them were. I was really, really happy to serve in Iraq. It was very tough duty, but serve with our armed forces over there and see the sacrifices that were made and all our hard work was really an honor.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have a tremendous political background and a tremendous business background, and at one point going into 2010, you decided that you wanted to run for senator here in our state. What gave you that idea to want to run for senator?
Well, I think my 2 experiences in public service made me realize what a difference people serving in public office can make in people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that supporting raising money for candidates and supporting candidates is helpful, and it's part of the process. But the real changes and benefit to people's lives are made by the people who are in elected office.
Okay.
And in some cases in appointed office. But I thought that serving in elected office would give me an opportunity to make a difference. I still think it will.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to serve. And I'm doing this because I like people, I love this country, I love this state, and I think I can help.
Now, you did actually, you kind of changed your mind, or you kind of backed out when you was running for a senator in 2010 to decide to run for a governor. What made you make the switch from going from senator to governor candidate?
Well, I actually always thought I would make a better governor based on my experience. My experience is in problem-solving, decision-making. I have years of experience as an executive, management executive. And that's really what a governor does.
Uh-huh.
Governor is the chief executive officer for the state.
Okay.
A senator is a legislator, is one of 100 senators, and they're a large committee, and it's more like a debating society most days. And I'm probably less good at that than I am at the problem-solving, decision-making. So I always thought that if there was an opportunity to serve as governor of Connecticut, that would be a better, something I could probably do an even better job at it than as a senator. But at that time, Governor Rell had not decided whether she was going to run again, and so that wasn't open.
Okay.
So I got in the Senate race thinking, well, if I can win a Senate seat, I can make a difference there too. But when the governor slot opened, when Governor Rell announced that she was going to retire, that made more sense for me, and I switched over into that race.
Now, you did very well running for governor against Governor Daniel Malloy. You only lost actually by 6,000 to 6,500
Right.
votes,
Yeah.
and you really lost basically in the urban cities.
Yeah.
What strategy do you think you would be able to do differently if you decide to run in 2014 that you didn't do in 2010?
Well, I hope we're going to talk a little later in the program about the Republican Party and the challenges that the whole party faces. But I really think that we need to do better in the cities. I won 128 out of 168 towns. So I won most of the towns in Connecticut by a large majority, but I didn't win the ones that have the most people in them. So Republicans simply have to do better in our cities. I think a lot of Republicans feel that we don't have a very good organization set up in the cities, and so the infrastructure isn't there. So when an election cycle comes up, somebody, a candidate running a campaign, is facing the daunting task of having to build up their own organization. Whereas in a lot of the towns in Connecticut that aren't cities, the organization's already there. The people are there. It's easy to check in and plug in with them, and it's they're looking for a candidate to back. So that's part of what's missing. I also think the party needs to have a message that resonates with people in Connecticut cities. I really believe the Republican Party does have a message that makes sense for people in the cities, but I think that there's such an allegiance in most cities to the Democratic Party that it's hard for Republicans to get the message heard. It's shouted down by Democrats. And so we simply need to work harder to make sure the message gets through.
Well, I'm a little bit concerned that when we get into the party system, because I can remember in 1980 when Ronald Reagan won the presidential election and he had a landslide victory. And to see where we're at today, we're so concerned with the party system more than the individual. You have a tremendous political track record, of tremendous political background, and you might clearly be the best candidate to become governor. But if people are deciding now to be more concerned with the party system than the individual, do you feel that that's another issue that we need to look into as well?
Well, parties change all the time. I just read a fantastic book about President Lincoln.
Okay.
And many people may not realize that President Lincoln actually was a Republican. And all across this state, we have Lincoln Day dinners right around this time of year. Obviously, the parties change over time.
Okay.
And a party, in order to elect a president, has to appeal to a national electorate. And so sometimes it's not easy and not comfortable combining all the different people around the country you have to elect a president. So in a certain region of the country, the message that works out in another part of the country may not be very appealing. And I think that's what's happened to the Republican Party in the last election, that on the coasts where the Democrats did better, the messages that the Republicans were sending in the middle part of the country really weren't very appealing. And so we certainly, as a Republican Party in Connecticut, we need to do a better job of communicating what Republicans in Connecticut believe and will do if elected.
Well, I'm hearing all reports that the Republican is not reaching out to the fast-growing Latino population, and they've made a tremendous impact in this past presidential election. You're not able to really get the African-American vote, and those are two key political voting blocks.
Absolutely.
Now, you as a candidate running for governor in 2010 and planning for 2014, you're going to obviously have to get the urban cities really to become elected. What can you kind of tell and advocate to the urban cities that the other Republicans hasn't seemed to been able to do up until this point, to try to let them realize that you might be a better person to represent them here on a statewide than our current governor.
Sure. Well, the two issues that I think should appeal most to people in the urban environments are jobs and education.
Okay.
And I don't think we're doing nearly enough, and this Governor Moy isn't doing nearly enough to bring jobs to the inner cities.
Okay.
He has a very aggressive jobs program to bring jobs to Connecticut, and he's paying a lot of money to bring these jobs here, but they really aren't coming to the inner cities. So
Okay.
I think if the Republicans can convince, I believe that Republicans can do a better job at this, so I don't have any problem saying it.
Okay.
But I think if Republicans can convince voters in the cities that they're going to bring more jobs to the cities, that should be a good reason to vote for Republicans. Now, schools, we have some of the best schools in the country in Connecticut, but
Okay.
we also have the largest achievement gap. And the achievement gap is the difference between our best performing schools and our schools that are in mostly in urban areas, but where most of the kids are in school lunch, so it's on the government paid lunch program. So it's testing for socioeconomic capacity. And between the towns where we don't have kids on a school lunch program and we do, the gap is called the achievement gap. And we have the worst achievement gap of any state in the country. It's inexcusable because we have the resources, we have the talent, we have the teachers. So we simply need to do more, and we can do more. Maybe I'll get a chance to talk about the Connecticut Policy Institute, which I founded 2 years ago.
Okay.
And it's focused on developing policy, economic policy and education policy for the state of Connecticut. And we've issued several papers on education reform. And we have some ideas for making the schools better in Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, Waterbury, wherever they aren't doing well. And I think this administration has done some things on education reform, but a lot of it's sort of playing around the edges and not really going to make that much change. And I think if you had a Republican governor, and particularly if you had the support in the legislature for Republican points of views on education, we could make some very significant changes.
Do you think sometime that the urban cities and the Democrats kind of play politics together, that you do something for me, I do something for you, meaning that the Democrats give the urban cities just enough for them to survive off of? And it might be a misconception, or it might be facts, that many people sometime on the Republican side can't really relate. I don't know if you fit into this category, but I will ask you point blank. You come from a very wealthy town in Greenwich. Now, people in poor cities like Bridgeport, New Haven, New Britain, it might be hard for them to kind of relate towards the world that exists in Fairfield County, and it might be kind of hard for you to understand what people are going through in poor cities. How do the common similarities come closer together on both sides?
Boy, you really think politicians would do something like that? You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours?
I think this is definitely an improvement track record.
Actually, that's as long as it isn't illegal.
Right.
That's part of the beauty and part of what makes politics work, because politicians are good at sort of finding compromises, helping to spread things around a little bit so that everybody's taken care of.
Okay.
And so I think that politicians doing their job, as long as they're not handing out money under the table, but finding jobs for people, improving schools, all the things that people want. That's why they vote for politicians, because they want to have better lives. They want to have more money. They want to have better educations for their kids. So Democrats, Republicans don't have any inside track on that. I think that the Democratic Party has probably spent more time and maybe made a more convincing argument in some urban environments that people are going to get more, and maybe sort of some types of things that are more easily measured and seem more immediate the Democratic Party is better at delivering.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're talking about better schools and better education, if you're talking about more jobs,
Mm-hmm.
I'd go with a Republican every day, no matter where I lived.
Okay. Well, the misconception that a lot of people, and I'll try to get off of this topic and move on to something else in the urban cities, is that the Republicans want to help big business. They want to help the rich, where the Democrats, who support a lot of social programs, are more concerned with the poor people. Now, you're talking about the best solution towards poverty and social economic disparities would be economic development. But there's a system that exists, I think, in this country that kind of blocks a lot of those resources from being implemented. That there's a lot of money to be made in social services. And that's a tremendous industry, actually, in this state, which is costing
Sure.
the state a lot of money.
Sure.
And this is also considered a blue state, Democratic state.
Very well.
So, I mean, how do the
Navy blue, I think.
Navy blue at that, okay. So how do the Republicans will be in a position to overcome some of those barriers that exist here?
Well, first, you mentioned something a couple minutes ago. You said I'm from a wealthy community.
Yes.
And some people may question whether or not I understand what goes on in cities. Well, nobody ever asked that of Franklin Roosevelt, who grew up in a very wealthy community and was from a very wealthy family. President Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
So this is more about party affiliation than whether or not somebody's wealthy. Listen, I'm probably not as wealthy as people think I am.
Okay.
But I'm certainly very comfortable and by any definition, very well-to-do. So,
okay.
But everybody has challenges in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody, well, there may be people who've never experienced any difficulty financially or otherwise, but I'm not one of them.
Okay.
And I feel very lucky, and I've been able to do a lot of wonderful things in my life. But I've experienced pain, hardship of various types, and it's not all related to money. So I think that just because somebody's wealthy doesn't mean that they aren't empathetic with people who aren't. That's certainly not the case with me. As for the party, the business, the connection, I never really thought of the Republican Party as being trying to deliver things to big business. I think the Republican Party believes that the economy and jobs for people and the well-being of the citizens is helped by providing a favorable environment for the business community. So taxes, regulations, and I think we're seeing this in Connecticut, where Connecticut's a state that's very unfriendly and very unaccommodating to business, and we've done a lot to drive jobs out here. So we have a unemployment rate that's ticked back up again. We're not restoring jobs at nearly the rate that the rest of the country is, and I think that's because we have a legislature here and now a governor who puts mandates on businesses, or just make it more expensive and more annoying to employ people here in Connecticut. A lot of them just throw up their arms after a while and go, hey, I love this state. I want to stay here, but I can't take this anymore. And so we've seen a lot of people leave. So I think it's easy to demagogue the Republicans' belief that by taking care of the business community, everybody's better off, and make it look like Republicans just hang out with big, wealthy business people, and they're all trying to figure out how can we, grab everything for ourselves. That's not really the way it works. And I find that populist movements, which I think Connecticut needs. I think Connecticut needs something of a populist uprising, because I really think what's happening is we have an elite government class here in Connecticut now that are all self-dealing and taking care of each other. And most populist movements have actually come out of the Republican side of the political spectrum more than Democrats. So, and populist movements, when you think about Teddy Roosevelt and others, they were anti-business. They were against the trusts and big corporations and the railroads. So I think it's a little unfair to just tag Republicans with being in the pocket of big business and being close to big business and wanting to take care of big business people.
Well, do you need both the legislative body here in the state and the Republican governor to really make something be effective? Because we had for many years John Rowland as a Republican governor to Jody Rell, and you still had the Democratic legislative body in place. Now we have both the Democratic governor and the Democratic legislative body in place. In the political world, do you need both systems in one order to really get your agenda moving on forward?
Well, it's better. You can get more done if you have both houses of the legislature and the executive branch in the same party. But I think if you had a Republican governor and you had the current legislature, it would be a lot better than what you have now. And I'm a very strong believer in leadership, and I think that with strong leadership, a Republican governor, even with a Democratic legislature, could get an awful lot done in the state, because a lot of it boils down to policy. And if the policy makes sense and it's intelligent and it's clearly explained, there's a lot of pressure whether you're a Republican or a Democrat to go along. So who can argue with against better schools? You know, some people have tried and they're trying to slow down school reform, but ultimately it's not going to work because better schools make sense. It's good for kids. It's good for the next generation. It's good for parents. And ultimately, it will prevail. And whether you're a Democrat or a Republican supporting school reform, it's going to happen.
Okay. Well, Connecticut is losing a tremendous demographic between the 18 to 34-year-old age bracket. And the number one reason is just not enough opportunities that exist in this state. You also hear that we don't have enough things to do, but I'm not convinced that that's the number one reason, because we've always been between New York and Boston. And when times were good and people had jobs and careers, if there wasn't enough activities to do in the state, you would always go to New York and Boston. If you become governor, how would you be able to attract and keep the young demographics that's leaving our state here in this state?
Well, a lot of it's attitude. Again, I mentioned leadership, but a sense of things getting better.
Okay.
And I think in Connecticut, I don't think anybody's getting a sense that things are getting better. And that's why a lot of young people are leaving. Since the recession that started in 2009, most of the rest of the country has replaced the jobs that were lost. We've replaced very few of them, about 20%. It depends on whether or not you look at Connecticut residents or jobs in Connecticut.
Okay.
Connecticut residents have actually lost 26,000 jobs since Governor McCauley took office. So this is terrible. And I think young people get it, and they say, well, there are more jobs, and I don't know where they're going exactly, but maybe they're heading down south, maybe they're heading to the Midwest, or even to, I don't think California's doing a whole lot better than we are, so I don't think they're heading to California, but they're heading out of here because they have a sense the opportunity is better. But if you had a good leader here and you had good policy and they could see that, hey, things are going to get better here, I think particularly people who grew up in Connecticut or people who came from out of state to go to school here would be inclined to stay. So there's nothing wrong with Connecticut. There's a lot of right with Connecticut as long as you can provide somebody a job and a means to earn a living.
Now, if you become governor, in the 90s, John Rowland implemented the welfare reform system, I guess giving people 21 months to get off of welfare and get into the workforce to some degree. Connecticut is a very friendly state in the social services area. What would be the best solution to kind of replace that system? I mean, obviously jobs and opportunities would be the number one answer, but what strategy did you think you would be able to implement to make that happen?
One of the things I like about Connecticut is it does have a lot of resources and does have a history and an inclination to help the most needy. So we do a very good job of taking care of our elderly and trying to promote programs that help with job training for people who are having a hard time with employment.
Okay.
Welfare, Medicaid, all the things that help people who are struggling. So that's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
I'm all for that. That's a good thing, and that's a reason I think why a lot of people like being in Connecticut and want to move here. We do take care of our people, but we also do a lot of things that waste money, and there are an awful lot of things that aren't going to the needy. A lot of government spending that isn't investing, for example, in infrastructure. People ask me, we've just raised taxes by several $billion. We have the highest tax load on our citizens of any state in the country. How can you be driving around here and the bridges are rusting, or potholes? It looks like the place is falling apart. And the reason is that the money is not being invested in infrastructure, and it's not going really just to the needy. There's an awful lot of money that slips out and goes to basically people who are already employed, middle class. We all know about entitlements and one thing or another. So that has crowded out the spending on the needy and the spending on investing in infrastructure. And if you saw what happened in the latest budget act about 3 weeks ago, where they're trying to close a $415 million deficit, that the needy got hit. And you saw with the rescission, autistic children, Alzheimer's patients, rape victims, breast cancer patients, they're all getting cut back. But a lot of the people who get entitlements from the state and earn money from the state who don't really need it, they didn't get hurt at all. And it's really, it's terrible. It's just bad policy.
Well, recently we had a tremendous tragedy, and I know you want to get to one important issue, but I just want to get this issue across. And Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newton, Connecticut. And I think nobody really saw that coming, but it did happen. And I'm hearing so many issues now about mental illness problems that we have, gun debate issues, and I don't know how you feel about President Obama appointing Vice President Joe Biden to run this new task force to try to deal with illegal guns and guns in our society. Is this something that you think our current governor is on top of? Would you kind of give him credit for his leadership that he's doing right now?
Well, I think he announced at the opening session of the General Assembly that he was going to do something, but I haven't seen the specifics, so I don't know what it is. We already have gun laws in Connecticut that are much more restrictive than the federal gun laws.
Okay.
So I think the gun laws here are probably, if you look at what Vice President Biden is proposing, we probably already have most of those things here in Connecticut, so I'm not sure how much effect it would have here in Connecticut. I also think that after something like this happens, you have to make sure you don't overreact.
Okay.
And I would think that one thing they ought to look at is whatever gun control measures that they propose here in Connecticut, for example, would they have prevented this crime? And it seems to me that this is a very deranged young man, obviously, but these weapons were purchased by his mother. So I think the laws they're talking about are restrict who can buy a weapon, but but his mother apparently wasn't deranged or qualified to buy these weapons, and yet he had access to them. So some of these things probably wouldn't have made any difference in this very unfortunate crime, and some would have. But I think we ought to look at it in the context of, well, we're reacting to this terrible crime. People want to have something done, make sure that it can't happen again, but let's make sure that we don't do a whole lot of things that wouldn't have changed or made a difference in this situation, affect other things maybe adversely or otherwise.
Well, would this kind of try to bring our state closer together? Because every now and then we have a tragedy and everybody seems to come together to support the cause or to support the family. And then once the emotions and everything wear off, we kind of go back to our separate ways. Just recently, there was a big meeting with the 2 state senators here in Connecticut talking about the need to do something about guns and gun laws. And when you have a tragedy, sometimes you get pointing the fingers, blaming people, saying that if you would have been listening to us, we could have probably did something differently. Would you, advocate that we try to work together with the clergy, with the people that's in the mental health field, to make sure that we're doing everything we need to do to make our state a much safer state here?
Well, it's human nature for people to pull together when there's been a tragedy. We see it time and time again.
Okay.
I think what was surprising to me was that one of the reasons I live in Connecticut is it seems a little more civilized than many states. And so when these tragedies happen somewhere else, it's very easy to say, well, that was somewhere else. That would never happen in Connecticut.
Right.
And then it happens here. And I think it's a time for reflection. It pulls people together, and there's an immediate impulse, I think, for people to sort of lay their differences aside and cooperate for healing, for the victims, and to try and get something done so it can't happen again. So this is all good stuff, and I hope it lasts a while. But people will get back to the regular business and the pressing issues of the day. I don't think these victims will ever be forgotten, and I hope there is some legacy where, as you say, communities find ways to pull together and collect resources and if there's a legislative solutions that would help prevent something like this from happening again, that there will be a legacy of changes being made so that it can't happen again.
Well, one of the criticisms is that I'm hearing, and I really hate to get into politics on this particular topic, but saying that you're here this morning and you're going to run for governor, or you're considering running for governor, there's so much talk about in urban cities in our state that we have so many people being killed through gun violence already for a very long period of time. You hear horror stories sometime when children are being thrown off of buildings. And some of the clergy and the leaders here in our urban cities feel like the urban cities towards gun violence are being ignored. And this issue is obviously a national, worldwide issue. So it's going to draw a lot of attention and resources, and particularly the way that it happened. But at some point, do you think we need to deal with gun violence on an everyday basis when you hear the stories of what goes on in the cities throughout our state?
Well, let's just talk about violence in general, because I think the reason you have violence in inner cities is because we aren't doing enough to get young people jobs, and we aren't doing enough in our educational system, and they're related. So I understand, I don't know that this is true for sure, but I understand that in Connecticut, the Department of Corrections plans their need for prison space based on how many male high school dropouts there are in Connecticut's cities who didn't have a father present in the home.
Okay.
And that's a very good predictor of how many people you're going to have being convicted of crimes and spending time in prison. So clearly, keeping young people in school, getting them to finish their, and I believe the connection between dropping out and crime is that when people drop out, they're less employable.
Yes.
So it's harder for them to get a job. It's harder for them to earn a living. And if you can't earn a living, what do? You have to do something. You have to eat. If you have a family, you have to provide for your family. So I think we need to come up with solutions that keep young people in school in the inner cities. I talked about better schools, doing something to solve the achievement gap, and bringing more jobs to our inner cities. I think that would bring the crime down more than doing something about guns. Now, that having been said, a lot of cities like New York City, they have totally different regulations about guns than the federal laws permit generally across the land, for example. So I think if those community leaders thought it would help, maybe they could propose some local ordinances that would reduce violent crime with weapons.
What about the current drug policy that exists here in our country, in our state, that has a lot to do with the gun violence that exists throughout our nation, in our state, and particularly in our urban cities? Do you think it's something that you would look into if you become governor, to revamp our current drug policy?
Well, again, I think most people, a lot of the people who are taking drugs are certainly engaging in violence related to drugs. Again, are people who are having a hard time getting a job, people who didn't complete school. So I think it all comes back to economic and educational issues. And I think if we could tackle those, it would do more to reduce violence and the use of guns in inner cities than doing something specifically focused on either guns or on drugs.
So you would rather deal with the social economic barriers of not having enough economic development in businesses and educational attainment more than trying to address the drug policies and the gun laws. I mean, you would kind of rather do one level first, and then if it's not working, still look into the drug policy laws and the gun laws?
Well, government, whether it's a municipal government or a state government, has an obligation to provide a safe and secure environment for the citizens. So I think good policing, all the things that are related to security and safety obviously are a primary role of government, and I'm not saying that in any way ought to be relaxed. In our cities, where we don't have as many resources as some parts of the state, we need to make sure that they have the resources to provide that type, the security they need. But when you ask me about the use of guns and gun violence in cities, what do I think is going to solve the problem? I think it's going to be jobs, and reforming the educational system will have more to do with solving that problem long term than gun control or drug policy.
And you would obviously put most of the resources in those categories up front if you was to become elected in your first 4 years. That would be one of your top agendas?
That's where I would focus my efforts, because I think that's what would have the most impact.
Okay. There was a particular topic that you wanted to discuss before we run out of time. What was the topic that you wanted to address before?
Well, I mentioned the Connecticut Policy Institute, which is developing this white papers on education reform, job incentives, our higher education system, vocational and college system here in Connecticut. So we're developing a lot of things along the lines of what we're talking about. We haven't done anything on gun control or drug policy yet, but we might because they're obviously important issues. So that's one thing I'm working on, and something that I hope people will listen for and pay attention to. You wanted to talk about the party and where the Republican Party is going. I don't know how much time we have left, but it's kind of a long subject. But I totally agree with you. I think the Republican Party, because they're trying to appeal to a national audience, has been drawn to issues, or at least tagged and identified with issues in the Northeast that aren't important to the broader voting population in the Northeast. And those are social issues and issues of minorities in the cities and immigrants. And I think that the Republican Party needs to figure out a better message, something more that can be delivered to those groups to get their support and enthusiasm. And I think we'll figure it out, because, as I said, parties move around. They figure out how to bring people in, how to change their message and appeal so they can win elections and get things done. And I think the lesson of the Republican Party in the last couple of cycles has been we haven't quite got the message right, and we need to do it. And on the other hand, I believe that the Republican Party, from a policy point of view, actually has more to offer than the Democrats do right now. It's just we're not getting the message through. We're not making believers out of the people who would most benefit from having Republicans in office. We need to do a better job of that.
And you feel as an individual you would have more to offer as with your proven track record than our current governor that's running our state?
Absolutely.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I guess where you at your life, you recently had, I guess, a family or some 2 children, twins, I believe.
I have 15-month-old twins.
Okay.
Boy and a girl. They're lovely. They just learned how to walk last week. So I've been giving walking lessons, and now we have gates on the top of our stairs so they can't hurt themselves, and I've been child-proofing our house, and so I'm doing all the stuff that usually people a lot younger than I are doing, but I love it.
Do you have enough time? I mean, you're a very busy man with businesses and politics. Do you have enough time to really be devoted towards your family like you want to, or is it just some type of...
It's actually an interesting question, because it's all about priorities. If somebody... the way I would characterize it is I think children are the most important things we do, and if you're fortunate enough as a parent to have children, that's your primary legacy, it's your primary responsibility. So I make the time. Everything else suffers.
Okay, all right.
So if my children need something or need me, and I think parents spending time with their children, even if there isn't some immediate need, is an important part of their development. So I make the time available, and then everybody else has to squeeze in with what's left.
Okay. Now, I guess the next election for governor is going to be in 2014, so you still have a lot of time or some time left to plan and figure out, what would be your next move. Beyond that, do you have any other aspirations that you would want to pursue with your life?
I've always wanted to write a book.
Okay.
Yeah. I like understanding things and learning about what makes things happen and how things work, and I like when I have a flash that goes off in my head and I say, aha, that boy, now I get it, these 3-4 things are connected. And I like sharing those things with other people, so maybe I'll try and find some kind of a way to write about some of the things that I've learned and come to understand over my life, and help people who don't understand them understand them. So that's a pretty modest ambition. But again, you mentioned time. It's writing something of length requires a lot of discipline and a lot of time. So I hope I get to a point where I can do that.
Well, if you become governor, it's going to be a very demanding job. I mean, anytime.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be writing a book while I'm serving as governor. Yeah.
But if that's a passion that you really want to be involved with towards helping the state turn itself around, 'cause I think you have to have some type of passion to keep the fire going. You've been very successful as a business person, no doubt about that, but you seem to be dissatisfied the way our state is running government here. Is that a passion or a drive that you just have inside you that you want to help turn the state back to where it could be?
Well, yeah, I think it's more my public service that's driving me to run for governor. My experience there, I think business experience is a useful tool in being a governor, because you're an executive, you're a decision maker, problem solver. Those are all important parts of the job. And that's experience, for example, that Governor Malloy doesn't have. It's experience that most legislators, if they've been career politicians, don't have. So I have that. But I think what will make me a good governor, and what's motivated me to run for governor, is my public service and understanding how politics works, how you can help people, how you pull people together, provide leadership, share ideas, and get things done. Because a lot of things in politics, it's just a lot of people talking to each other, and the rubber doesn't meet the road. And I think I would be a very effective governor. I think because of my interest in policy and the Connecticut Policy Institute, I understand the policy side of what the state needs. So I think my public service experience has motivated me to do more, and my love of the state, and I like helping people. I tell you about writing a book. Part of the motivation is, hey, I've learned some things here that have helped me in my life, and I think are valuable, have made me a more effective person, and enabled me to enjoy my life more. I'd like to share this with other people if it helps them. So I think a lot of it comes from inside, wanting to help people and make Connecticut and the world a better place.
Well, no matter what happens in 2014, do you still plan to remain a state resident here?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you love the state.
I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
That you're recommitted here.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, we've covered a lot of different areas, and obviously, you seem to have a lot to offer, and I'm glad that people was able to really find out a lot about your life here. Is there anything out there that people don't know about you that you would like for them to know?
Well, we've covered an awful lot of things about where I've been and what I've done and what I care about. We've talked about parenting. I think if anybody said, what do you think is the most important thing you do or I've done, I think it's parenting, raising children, being engaged in my community, and I think that politics is an even broader engagement. So I didn't come from a really wealthy family, so I had to have a career where fended for myself and made my own way. So I kind of saw my life, in addition to parenting, as getting the best education I could and trying to get enough income and resources together so that I could go out and make a contribution after that. So this is sort of how I see it progressing here, and I'm happy with what I'm doing. If I don't get elected governor, you're still going to be hearing from me because I care about these things. I want to make people's lives better, and it is a passion.
Okay. Any last closing words you would like to leave?
No, just thank you very much for having me on. We've known each other for some time. We were together on a radio show a couple of years ago, and I was running before, so I hope you'll have me back. And I'm planning to spend a lot of time here in Hartford, understanding the issues that people care about here, and hopefully getting some support if I run for governor in 2014.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, again, this was Jonathan Small, host of All About You. Today, my very special guest was Thomas C. Foley. This program, again, is called All About You. It's run on accesstv.org network. You can watch many other programs throughout the week. I enjoyed having my guests here and doing the show here today for you. And until the next time, everybody have a very blessed day. Thank you.
Okay.